Okay, moving right along. Uh, let's look at an 1862 map of the colony of Natal. 1862, it's now firmly established as a British colonial capital. And I want to suggest that you can look at maps in at least two ways. The first one, look at them as a snapshot. What was it? What would the place look like? What was there? What were the names of places in 1862? And so on. A literal one. The second way of looking at a map is to say, what does it suggest to you mentally? What is not factual? What does it suggest to you? Are there implications in the map? For instance, if you looked at the names of places here, clearly there's a mixture of some Dutch, some English, very little in the way of Zulu names, African names, and so on. If you were to look at the farm names, the street names, New England, New Scotland, Victoria, there's all sorts of English names here, which suggest that the English settlers were here, but they're actually longing, they would like to recreate England in an African setting. The Afrikaner place names and farm names in particular, such as Weltevrede, Ver Genoeg, Bly voor Uitzicht, all of those things, Nooit Gedacht, wonderful names, Weltevrede, that they're well satisfied, Nooit Gedacht, never thought about it, and so on. So it's a very different sense of belonging to the African continent and so on. But I'll come back to that. So there's a factual and then there's a mental stroke cultural reading of a map. Now the map's in 1862. I think the thing that jumps out to you, if you look at this map, is the dominance of Maritzburg. Maritzburg is a vast area, more or less in the center of the colony, and you can almost interpret it that there's Maritzburg, there's that little grid section, but they're envisaging that Maritzburg is going to grow into this metropolis with tentacles, arteries that stretch into a much area. So it's going to become not just a small place in the Midlands, it's going to dominate the Midlands, which may be a pointer for the future. Have we done that? If we haven't done it, how do we do it? And so on. So the sharp contrast then between the central, pivotal place of Maritzburg, and then you've got this funny little place down here around the bay, and there is 1862, Durban is 3 or 4 blocks. So at this point in time, you would have no way of seeing that there would be a complete flip-flop, that this port would grow into one of the biggest ports and major port cities in the Southern Hemisphere, and that it would completely dominate the Pietermaritzburg situation. Now, another interesting little thing, Maritzburg, as you can see, if you're from Maritzburg, you had direct access to the Drakensberg, to Giant's Castle. So imagine taking a leisurely drive and so on. Then, and this is 1860. Very soon, of course, diamonds are discovered in Kimberley, and there's a rush on. Goods want to come into Durban. Durban managed to dredge the entrance to their harbour so that ships could come in at any time other than only at high tide. And then, obviously, then in 1886, the discovery of gold along the Witwatersrand near Johannesburg. Durban became the closest South African port to that, so it became a major importer, exporter. 1860 to 70, 70 to 80, Durban's population doubled in each of those 2 decades. So in 1860, Maritzburg was a lot bigger. By 1880, tables had been turned dramatically. There were still Maritzburg people who thought somehow Durban wouldn't keep going and Maritzburg would. So Maritzburgers suffered, I think, mentally, that they were no longer the biggest, most important place. And then, of course, the tag comes along, Sleepy Hollow, and so on. And I think that's put a damper on Maritzburg's outlook. I can remember when I first got onto the city council, if we had a debate about development, they'd say, no, but we don't want to be developed. We don't want big, dirty factories here. And you'd say, but what about unemployment? What about this? What about that? So Maritzburg got caught. They resented that Durban got bigger, but they actually didn't want all of the things. They didn't want traffic congestion. They didn't want noise. They didn't want pollution. Quite understandably. But the point I'm making is you lower your sights in. You don't become an ambitious city. In year 2000, when I was the manager, I organized the city's first ever investment conference. The Chamber of Business boycotted it. All sorts of reasons. So Maritzburg did not want to develop. And we announced incentives there to say, right, if a new industry comes here, we'll give them cheaper electricity, cheaper water, and so on for a period. And if you're an existing business and you want to expand, we'll give you the same incentives and so on. And it was very successful. Hewlett's expanded, Belgiotex expanded. So I can point to a number of new things that came in. But the point is, Maritzburg was a little reluctant to say, if you want development, there's things that come with development. It does get noisier, the traffic does become. So you need one-way streets. Maritzburg, that was a huge thing. Oh, one-way streets, what is that? Not realizing that, hey, from Northdale, how do you get to this side of town? Or from Edendale, how do you get to Northdale? Well, if you don't have one-way streets, it's impossible. You can't. So you can't commute. So Maritzburg, in a way, has resisted. It's been envious of Durban's growth and so on. And then, of course, everything that started in Maritzburg. The Natal Rugby Union started here, moved to Durban. Cricket, doesn't matter what you take, things start here. The university, hey. Maritzburg campus is now a poor relation to the Durban campus. Never was like that, and so on. Maritzburg campus doesn't have medical, doesn't have engineering, so on and so forth. So it's a university, but it's a subsidiary university. Whereas Durban gets a fully fledged university, offers a whole range of things. So by 1880, Maritzburg had become, yes, by comparison, a Sleepy Hollow. But, you know, a second-class city in relation to what was happening in Durban. We come to 1910, and South Africa consists of the Cape and Natal as British colonies, and then you had the two Afrikaner republics, Transvaal, it wasn't called that, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. All right, so they came to, and they actually had their unification meetings in the first town hall in Durban. So it took place in our province. The outcome of that was that Pretoria got to be the administrative capital of the Union. Cape Town was the legislative, and Bloemfontein, the judicial seat of the Supreme Court. So little old Maritzburg lost out. It was one of the 4 provincial capitals. The other 3 all got major boosts. major buildings, major underpinnings to the economy. Those things secured it. Cape Town, nothing against Cape Town, but it's a hang of a long way from Pretoria. So the cost of moving government for 4, 5, 6 months of the year to Cape Town and then back to Pretoria, all of that didn't make, and still doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But the point I'm making is Maritzburg clearly was not aggressive enough and saying, damn it, we are a capital and we want a slice. We want a slice of this pie. What does Bloemfontein get? So Maritzburg didn't get a single thing out of the Union of South. In fact, we lost. We lost status, we lost ground dramatically. So Durban's outgrown us, the formation of the Union. So these are things which are putting a damper on Pietermaritzburg. It's almost putting a ceiling on it and saying, listen, that's your lot in life. You're a sleepy last outpost of the British Empire. Just be happy and stay that way. Don't, big cricket's moved, rugby's moved, just stay where you are. And stay in your own corner, in that way. And I think mentally that's dented. I remember when we were negotiating for the Liberty Mall, people were saying, oh, no, Maritzburg doesn't need a mall. It's not big enough. So Maritzburg people were quite prepared to drive to the pavilion if you wanted to buy a fridge or you wanted to buy a car, you drive to Durban. When I first got here, I said, hey, no, this is crazy. I'm here. This is not some backwater town. We should have a mall here. And it took a lot of arguing. There were a lot of the officials. When the Liberty group came, I had the heads of department and I said to them, this is our last chance. Because there have been 5 or 6 attempts to bring a mall here. And I said, gentlemen, if any one of you raises some piddly objection to this, I said, I'll kick you under the table and I'll fire you tomorrow. Those were my exact words. I said, this is our last chance. Right? They came down, I think they had 16 people and a presentation. We were having tea. I said to the MD, look, before we start, I said, you got a presentation, I've got all my heads here. What is the key thing here? What is the one thing that will decide this? He said to me, Mr. Haswell, the roadworks, the access off the N3 is critical. And this mall cannot pay for it on its own. So I called a quick meeting. Mayor was there, chief engineer was there. I said, listen, we own the land on the other side. So if we design an exit, it's going to dramatically open up the mall side, but it's also going to open the other side. So let's agree to share the costs. They said, yes. I said to the 2 engineers, how long do you need? They said, no, they came back and they said, look, 70-30. Liberty should pay 70, the city 30. I walked back, I said, how's 70-30? He shook my hands, he said, it's a pleasure to do business with you. So we clinched it. But I had to stand up and fight about it. And because people were still reluctant. Do we actually want this or don't we? And of course, the mall has turned out, I sold them extra land as well, which they said, no, we'll buy it, but it's 5 years before we even think about it. That a mall is an exact science, number of the footprint and the spend, and it's computer generated. That will tell us when. Well, of course, it's proved to be their most successful mall at scale in the whole country. So again, one's had to work against that. So we lose out in 1910. We fiddle along as a very much of a provincial capital. So we had the Natal Parks Board. nice institutions, well managed, and so on and so forth. Nothing against them, but I'm saying the rest of the country got national parks. We were out of step. And again, so we got no national funding for the provincial parks. Now again, we're cutting ourselves short. So I don't want to over elaborate it, but you can see this. Is it a lack of ambition? Is it a lack of wanting to be bigger, to be in a more important place? So it's in the psyche somewhere of Maritzburg. That no, it's almost an inferiority complex. I don't want to sound like a cheap shot psychologist, but why would one accept being second best, playing second fiddle? You don't have to accept it. You've got to get out there. You've got to hustle. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen by chance. 1994, the IFP win the province, and they start saying, hey, Ulundi, we've got this big building there. It's an old Bantustan building, but no, yeah, whatever. And so we go through a decade where Maritzburg's only ace was that it was the capital. That now gets taken away. There's daily flights. Officials are flying back and forth to Ulundi and so on and so forth. Fortunately, in 2004, the elections, I think Maritzburg people realized if you exercised your second ballot, that you could influence the capital. So a capital coalition formed, the election won, and the Ulundi thing faded. So Maritzburg reinstated as capital. Let me hasten to add that if you look in our country's constitution, you will not see the word capital. You will not see the word metropolitan, local, but we use them. We say that's a metro, that's a capital. What the Constitution tells you, you'll pick a place where the legislature will meet. In layman's terms, you must have a legislative chamber, a parliamentary building where they can meet. And clearly, if that's where they meet, your provincial heads of departments, education, roads, whatever, transport, those buildings should also be there. Because that's what goes to make up, if you like, a capital. Those are things that go along with being the capital. So we come back, and yes, we reinstate it as the capital. And then for at least a decade, there's been talk about a parliamentary precinct. Parliamentary precinct. Lovely idea. Mpumalonga's got one. Bombela, where there's a council, provincial legislative building, all the departments in one area. Okay? People were talking about at Town Hill, that area, and so on. I think we've now reached a situation where we are now in 2025 to say there is never going to be a parliamentary precinct in Pietermaritzburg. There simply is not the money. You can't talk several $100 million. If the recent budget, it took us 3 times to sort out the budget and the year ahead. That budget process illustrated 2 things fundamentally. Firstly, that you can't just keep raising taxes for extra money. We've reached that limit. People are not going to tolerate extra rate VAT or anything else. It's not going to happen. Secondly, the government's also reached its borrowing limit. So those 2 things, additional revenue is not readily available, and you can't borrow. That means that any development that you talk about in South Africa now has to have private sector funding. Common terms, public-private partnership, PPPs. That's the name of the game now. You want to develop anything. Transnet, how do you sort out railways? Well, how do you sort the ports out? We've got to bring... So you can see on an almost monthly basis, private sector are being urged, come in, take over this railway line, take over the container terminal at Durban, take over the coal terminal at Richards Bay. They're all happening. So I want to suggest exactly the same. To be a capital, we've actually got to have a parliamentary building. Okay? To my way of thinking, the old Royal Showgrounds is an ideal. There it is, a big complex. The main arena is a big space. I'm saying let's put a roof over that so it becomes a multi-purpose one. Building a multi-purpose arena. The provincial government is the anchor tenant. You know, shopping centres work because the big guys become the anchor tenants. So I'm saying the province becomes the anchor tenant. Whenever they need it for the full legislature to sit or for committee meetings, they've got first option on it. But when it's not used for Parliament, then it's available for concerts, for conferences, and for sport. SAT 20, it is ludicrous that Maritzburg, our schools produce phenomenal cricket players, they end up playing for Paul. I mean, come on, guys, let's get serious. How can we allow Paul to be a bigger cricket centre than Pietermaritzburg? So that's my suggestion. The property is privately owned, and with the little energy I've got left, I want to advance that. And can we get the provincial government and the private property owner to start talking realistically? How do they share costs so that we build a multi-purpose? It's well serviced by the N3, the roads, and so on. And I think finally then, after how many years, Maritzburg would actually have what it takes to be a capital in the new South Africa. Thank you.
So, Rob, that's a lot of food for thought. And I'm just going to throw something else in the mix. What about Pietermaritzburg becoming a sporting capital? I mean, we have some of the biggest events taking place here. Wouldn't be a bad idea now, would it?
Now you're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I hinted at it. It's sad to me that the Sharks have Durban on their jersey. Racing is now coming, they call it Race Coastal.
Yeah.
Race Coast. Now, we're not on the coast.
Yeah.
So does that mean Scottsville and Racecourse and the breeding in the Midlands? What is it? We're left out of it.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, we mentioned cricket, in rugby.
Yeah, we produce the best cricket players, the best rugby players, the best hockey players.
Yeah.
I mean, the cycling is Pietermaritzburg's known for cycling,
And
so
I
maybe
mean,
that's the way forward, eh?
I applaud what's been achieved with the Tuskers cricket. They've got themselves in the first division.
Yes.
For heaven's sake, some Maritzburg company should pick them up and say, hey, here's some real money. Get.
Serious.
What
More
will it take
serious.
to bring David Miller home?
Yeah, yeah.
Cyril Ervier to play.
Yeah.
That's just two names off the top of my head where you start building a team.
Absolutely.
Around that. And then going forward to say, okay, every year we've now got 10 bursaries for the cricketers from local schools. Keep them here.
Lots to think about. And with that, I think it's a wrap for this week's episode. Thanks.